Now that we've discussed texture, let's delve a bit more into painters' chalk and pastel media. In a traditional environment, it is sometimes the case that two different mediums don't play nice with one another. For example, the oil content in a pastel may interfere with the application of dry chalk to the same area of a work in progress. That is not the case in Painter's digital environment. We can use almost any of Painter's media and they will coexist just fine. In this video, we'll add some crisp detail to the drawing in order to attract the viewer's eye. So here's my drawing up to this point, and what I want to do now is start to go in and emphasize areas of this. For example, I think I want to emphasize the edge of the vase. I might want to go in and do that a little bit with the flowers, just anywhere where I want to increase contrast. And the way the eye works, wherever it finds contrast, that's where it's going to be attracted. So I can literally start to direct the viewer's eye around this image by placing areas of high contrast within this composition. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So once again, I'm going to go ahead and create a learning layer here so we can see how this works. And later on, we'll look at the final. I'm going to go ahead and use chalk. And why I want to do that is, as I mentioned earlier, the oil pastel tends to be a little smeary and it's hard to get a real crisp edge. I want these edges to really pop. So it makes sense to go back to our chalk and use it. So let's go back here to chalk. I'm going to use the square chalk again, and let's reduce its size. So let's just start working a little bit on this vase. I'm going to go ahead, and this is where I can use the ability to sample a color. You may remember earlier I talked about customizing the buttons on my Wacom pen. I can instantly on my front button here turn this into a sampler so I can get a color very quickly. Now I've got that color, and I might even darken it up a little bit more. So now I can play with that ability to, by pressure, change how much or how little of these lines show up. And I want to do enough so you can start to see how the addition of these lines start to give the eye something to look at. It's not like there's nothing there to look at now. It's just that those high contrast, sharp lines begin to cause the brain to want to go check those things out. Now let's do some white. And once again, based on pressure, I can either keep it very light like that, or I can go in here and actually do a solid line more or less. And we didn't talk about that earlier, but I can actually go in and if I want this to go all the way down into paper grain, unlike it is now, I can do so. In fact, let's go over to right here. This is the grain slider. And the lower this is, I'll just do a little sample of it here. See how I'm now just only capable of skipping the tops of the paper grain. I'm pressing as hard as I can, and I cannot get all the way into that paper grain. That's because my grain is set to a very low percent. Now, I know from experience with this grain that around 10% is where I like it, but I'm going to go ahead and turn it up a little higher. And now I can actually get all the way in there. Actually, there's just a little bit still showing, so I'm going to undo that. And let's just crank it up full bore. See, now I've got a brush that's just 100% white. And I can even still play around with how much I'm imparting based on my hand pressure. So if I still want a light stroke, I can. But as soon as I want a fully white stroke, I just press harder. Now, these are the kinds of things that sometimes it reminds me of, if you remember the thing we used to do as a kid where you try to rub your stomach and the top of your head at the same time, and it just seems really hard to do. This is one of those things, watching it, it looks like, how is he controlling all that? But I can assure you that once you get used to the pen and start using it regularly, it just comes as second nature. It's not even something you'll ever think about. And I can assure you that what may look difficult on screen here when you're watching it is a very different experience when you're actually doing it yourself. In Painter's digital environment, mixing media is no problem. Being able to use whatever brush gets you where you want to go is totally acceptable, as well as desirable from the artist's point of view.